Do you ever feel like your inner life is cluttered with things like stress and anxiety? Well, stick around because we're going to talk about 3 ways that you can begin to experience more peace and joy in your everyday life.
Hey guys, it's Mindy Linscomb, your host of the Something New show, where we like to learn how to live a life worth celebrating. And today, flown in from Nashville, I'm so excited to have one of my lifelong friends, probably one of my earliest friends of my memories. We grew up together in Illinois, and then now she lives in Nashville and flew in today for a very special interview to be with us. So I'm so glad you did. Thank you, Trina, for coming today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's so fun, Mindy, to be with you.
Well, when I started the show, I said, hey, my top 10 list, this would be one of my top 10 guests I really wanted to interview just because of our history together, but then also because I believe the work you're doing is so important. So before we get too far into it, I want to read to you guys about Trina, and I don't want to miss a thing, so I'm going to read about it. Trina McNeilly is the author and founder of La La Lovely, where she has been writing and building community online for 13 years, sharing matters of the heart and design-related finds. With an eye for beauty, Trina finds inspiration in styled spaces, broken places, and everywhere in between. Through soulful writing in the voice of a trusted friend, she guides others to find joy and goodness in their everyday lives. Her work also includes creative direction, styling, and design project. Trina is a new resident of Nashville, where she lives with her husband and their 4 children. So that was your first book, La La Lovely, and I thought it was absolutely the prettiest book I've ever had on my coffee table.
Thank you.
I still think is beautiful. And later today, we're going to talk about your newer book. But before we do, I just want to say, hey,
Hi.
it's been 40 years that we've been knowing each other, which is
know.
crazy. And some of the funny stories we have is playing things like this, playing newsroom or playing like we had a real
Store.
cash register playing store in both of our basements. Lots of fun memories as little kids. And then grew up. I still remember your husband interviewing my at the time boyfriend to make sure he was good enough for me to marry Jordan, and he approved. I think it's because they both have that Southern, gentleman kind of vibe. He was like, okay, he's a nice one.
And I was your small group leader for a while in high school.
You
right?
were? Yep. You're a small group leader. And I will never forget the time that you multiple times would get really upset with me and your little sister for going through your closet because you have the coolest clothes. And so we would like to go and try them all on, but they wouldn't necessarily get back in the closet.
No.
And I think that was part of the problem. But glad to have you today. And I think some of your story probably led you to the work, but let's start with just the design stuff you were doing early on before Instagram influencers were a thing. I don't even think Instagram existed when you were starting to blog. So you started a blog. Let's start there. You started a blog and tell me about that. I started
a blog. I think the year might have been 2008.
Okay.
So it was kind of like, I call it like the OG bloggers, but there was this thing happening where people were starting blogs, and I always loved to write, so I was so interested in it. I kind of have always been the friend that people would ask me, oh, where should I go eat? Or do you like this dress? Or can you help me with decorating? Just kind of sharing opinions and designs and so forth. So I was like, oh, this could be really fun. And so I started a blog and came up with the name La La Lovely. And it just kind of went from there. And so, I would share, I love to write since I was a kid. So there would be kind of, I called it like matters of the heart or some spiritual encouragement type of posts, but I also really got into design blogging. And I, at the time, was living in the home that I grew up in, that you were at so much in your younger years. My husband and I bought the house, and so I was in the process of kind of making that house my own. So I shared a lot of that online, and I started working with different brands and doing collaborations, like with the Land of Nod. They're no longer in existence, but they were kind of the kid division for Crate and Barrel. So I did a lot of projects with them and other brands, and it was just a really fun time. There was such a community then without that social media aspect, and just so much inspiration. Like, I loved it, and I kind of miss those days because social media has
taken over the blogging.
Yeah.
I mean, some people even wonder about if blogging is still helpful. I do think it's still helpful, but I do think it's kind of like a little bit buried.
It's in a resurgence.
Yeah,
let me tell you,
it.
on Substack. So
Talk about that.
Yeah. So yeah, I did start a Substack because it kind of was like, I want to get back to that original. It's just very, it doesn't have to have like all of the bells and whistles of Instagram. It doesn't have to be super polished, but it's attracting all kinds of writers and people. There's a lot of like independent journalists on Substack. It's really geared towards writers. So it's a really neat space.
Where blogging had to be very aesthetically pleasing as well. So you're saying Substack's more like, hey, read, get your information. It's a great place to read.
Right. I mean, you can do some things aesthetically, but it's not like you're building out, your own website now, that type of a thing. Some are doing that, where they're working with some major, I don't even want to use the word influencers. I'm thinking of a news agency that's now kind of going through Substack, and you wouldn't know it was Substack if you looked at it. But it's also a way for writers to generate income. It's a subscription-based platform, which is really exciting for writers. I've created online content for free for, 2008, over 10 years. I mean, more than 10 years. So, so this way you can have a subscription option. So I've got people that pay for a subscription to read my writing, and then, free subscribers as well. So I could offer,
some light content. You get a few articles for free, but pay for more.
Yeah, there's some really neat things that you can do. But I think if people, like writing, or they have, just a creative spirit and they want to try something, check out Substack, because it's a great place to start and put ideas out there and practice.
So for people writing on there, at your content specifically, are you kind of still doing the mixture of spiritual mind and design, or are you focusing more on one topic?
Yeah. Well, I feel like I'm personally in a place of just growth where I kind of need to find a new place for myself. So I gave it a name called the Everyday Observer. Mindy knows, come from a newspaper family. I love that part of my background, and I very much like current events and news and politics and all the things that sometimes we don't want.
And the Royals.
I love the Royals. So, and in all of my writing, whether it was La La Lovely, the art of finding beauty in the everyday, whether it's in my new book, Unclutter Your Soul, I really want to help people in their everyday lives, because that's where we live. So I just am talking about things that we deal with in our everyday lives. And sometimes.
And just how you observe it.
How I observe it. Yeah.
Response.
I am an observer. So if I observe something, I want to write about it and I share. So I'm still finding my feet, but that's where my new creative endeavor is right now.
It's like those Instagram reaction videos where you react to what you're seeing, but you write about what you're seeing.
I write. Yes. I do like Instagram. I loved it at the beginning when it was just, photographs. I'm very visual. I love creative direction and art and design, but doing all of the reels now and all of that is just, it's so much. So
I have a present for you. I just remembered at my house.
Oh.
So I was in England the day the Queen died.
I know you were.
So I got all the newspapers.
You did?
For you. I went around and bought them all, and I saved them to give them to you. So tonight, I'm going to give them to you. I literally forgot about
that's going to make me cry.
Yeah, I did. I was like, I have to get these for Trina. So they're sitting on my desk at home. Okay. So cool. I know it's amazing. And I'm going to England again this week.
I know.
So it's just so funny. I'm like, okay, one of these times you better come with me.
I love England. So I'm a big Anglophile. I love everything about England.
I love it. So, so then your book, La La Lovely, is basically photographs of how you transformed your home and then stories about it, right?
Yeah, some of that. It's really about beauty is really what it's about. And this idea that beauty is an answer to our ache. It's an answer to our pain, that God values beauty. And for us to behold beauty is important. And I was going through a horrible time in my life where everything, as I knew it, was kind of falling apart. I was living in that childhood home at the time, and my parents were going through a divorce. Just everything was kind of falling apart and unraveling, and And that was really a way for me to cope and find healing, was to kind of work on beautiful things, projects, to focus on beauty if that was outside in nature, to understand that God values beauty, that it says in the Message version in Psalms that God is sheer beauty. I mean, he is a creator. Beauty is important to him. And so it's just really my process of going through a hard time, of healing and how beauty can do that, and encouraging others to really understand beauty in a different light, that it isn't, this just aesthetic exterior thing that we've made it flashy and just, Instagrammy and shiny, but there's grit to it as well.
So switching, kind of like keeping that same topic, the grit, in your next book, you really talked about cluttering, being around us, our soul clutter, how to unclutter. But before we get into cluttering, what would you describe, and maybe as part of your story, was soul clutter in your life?
Yeah. So the second book is Unclutter Your Soul, Overcome What Overwhelms You. And I had an essay in the first book called Mental Clutter. And I just actually it started on my blog. So a lot of my writing it goes like journal to blog to book eventually. But it was just kind of this idea of we have so much kind of going on inside of our heads. And I kind of knew that was going to be the next book. But as I dug into it, I really understood it's more than what's just in our mind, it's our soul. And so if I can kind of explain what I mean by soul, your soul is comprised of your mind, your will, and your emotions. And I have a lot of big emotions, you know that about me. And so I really started to, actually a publisher offered me to write a whole book on mental clutter for my first one. And I didn't feel that I was in a place that I could serve my audience and readers. I was too much in the thick of it. And I'm like, I need to kind of journey through this myself. So by the time I was writing the first book, I was really working through it. And then it just kind of progressed into that. So I was finding that there was just so much going on the inside of me. And I see everything through the metaphor of homes or landscape. And God tells us that he makes his home in us. We are essentially like a living home. And I just started thinking of like cluttered houses or a hoarder home or something where or all of like in a basement where we shove stuff that we just don't want to deal with. It's like, oh, I just forget that it's there because I can't see it and it's in a bin or box
in a room
or a closet.
Open up. Yeah.
Right. And so as I was going through some really difficult things in my life, the Lord was like, yeah, we're going to open this closet. We're going to go through the boxes in the basement. We've got to sort through this stuff so that we can be healthy emotionally and spiritually and mentally, because that really matters. If we don't work through those things, right? I mean, I was starting to see as my kids got older, that was very humbling to me, that I was seeing things in them that I had not worked through yet. And it was a real mirror as my kids started to get into their teenage years. So,
could you share a little bit about what some of that clutter was?
Yeah. So soul clutter, I guess I don't have like a really tight definition of it, but you just think of like for me, my soul clutter would be things like fear, anxiety, depression, just narratives, like the stories that we tell ourselves or that things other people have said about us. I kind of uncovered anger, which was really surprising for me. But as I was going through a lot of grief and loss and addictions in my family, just really hard things, there was anger there, chronic stress, just all kinds of things. I list out in the book different ideas of what soul clutter is. But the great thing about God is that he's so personal. And so when we start to work on things, he might point out to you something that would not be my soul clutter, and you just kind of keep going through it. And just like a house, here's the thing, we can unclutter our homes, right, and make them beautifully organized, but we live life so more stuff comes in. So it's a process, kind of this process I created to kind of help in life, where I observe, own, and overcome, and just keep working through.
Yeah. And I want to go through those here in a second, those 3 ways that you say is like a good process to start. But what I find really interesting about your story that most people might not know is that a lot of your pain didn't necessarily come from your existing marriage, family, and kid unit.
Yeah, family of origin.
It more came from your family of origin brought into this family unit. And it's probably still a journey, but it was very much, and I mean, I had to learn this too, but just very much impacting your existing family, even though it was your family of origin that you were dealing with the stress from. So I don't know if you want to tell a little bit of that story.
Yeah. So really at the beginning of the first book, I share my parents, went through a divorce after nearly 40 years of marriage. I was in my 30s, 2 kids. 2 of my children knew my parents together, 2 did not. And it just kind of unraveled this whole identity even within me. There were other things kind of at play that were just kind of tearing the family apart, where it wasn't just parents separating. I was kind of grieving a relationship with my dad at the time. Just so many things that made me really unsure about things I was so sure about. And I know that other people can relate to that maybe in a different way, but we kind of all come to these things that...
Well, when you have a reality for so long, you believe that's the only truth, right?
Right.
But then when it's erupted, you start to see things with a different perspective and say, well, maybe what I thought of that person is actually not the real person that I knew.
Yeah.
And like, it can be as close as even, like you said, your dad.
Yeah. It's very disorienting, and there's grieving. It's hard to grieve a person who's alive. Some of us have had to do that for different situations. Maybe you have someone in your life that has an illness like Alzheimer's or personality disorder, mental illness, addiction, things like that. And so you're still talking to the person, or maybe you're still in a relationship, but they're not who they once were, or things have changed. And so there's just, a lot of things that you have to navigate, and things
very confusing, right?
Yeah. Confusing, and letting go of dreams and how you thought things should be and that you wished that they would be. So there was a lot of that going on in my life. Well, also, I kind of like, one set of kids was a little older, so going into like middle school, teenage years. And then I had 2 really close in age, 18 months apart, and they were little at that time. And so, I was kind of in a real survival mode for kind of 12 years. It was a long time. And I've really just am coming out of that now, to be honest, and kind of trying to find my footing again. I mean, I've learned so much, I've grown so much, but I'm going into a new season now. So I really have a heart for those that are in the thick of it, and they kind of can't see the forest for the trees.
Yeah. Wow. I'm just thinking about all the layers there, because it's hard for our immediate family to understand, because they're thinking, hey, we're married now, we're together, we're raising these kids. Why does that still impact you?
Yeah. Yeah. And I had there was, an illness. I just lost my dad in June. We're recording in January now, which I'm not like fully ready to, talk publicly about, but it was hard. I mean, it is hard right now. But I was dealing with a pretty extreme illness. And so for that, I did have to juggle raising my kids and also wanting to help and honor a parent. And I felt really strongly about that. Other people might have, felt differently or seen it differently, that might know the whole situation. But now that he has passed, I don't really have any regrets with that, because I did it unto the Lord, and I loved my dad very deeply. So, but it was a very difficult season. And what I hope, what I do wish I could go back is maybe do some things different in my family unit, where maybe there were times that I wasn't present. I was present, physically, but like mentally, there were times that
you were surviving.
I was surviving. And at that too, I'm not mad at myself, because I did the best
that you could,
that I could with what I knew. And it was some really hard stuff. But what I know, I already know that I've shown my children because, my oldest one has verbalized it to me, and I even know my younger ones have seen it, is how to honor a parent and how to love in a very difficult situation. And as I get older, I'm sure we'll talk about it more, and I will say, hey, maybe I did it this way wrong, or, I'd advise you this way or that. But I think they really got to see love in action and honoring a parent and honoring the Lord. I hope that's my prayer.
Well, and I just can relate to not necessarily the disease that you were dealing with within your family, but I can relate to really trying to understand, okay, what's the appropriate amount of attention you give to external family members once you do become married, because then your husband has an impact. He loses some of his wife the more we share our energy, our time, our stamina with other circumstances, then they're giving up some things too.
Yeah, for sure. And that's hard. And that's probably where I do have some regrets. But again, like I
did the best
the best I could. And I didn't really, it wasn't a situation where I was like, oh, well, I know so-and-so's been through this, so I'm going to go ask them. I mean, it was a very unique situation, and I couldn't even talk about it for a long time. I was just so, unto myself and just trying to survive it. So.
Okay, 3, 2, 1. It's showtime!
It's no secret by now that Something New is a special place where we believe life is worth celebrating. We come here every day to make sure people feel loved, welcomed, and brought into an experience of a lifetime. You'll see friendly faces, gorgeous gowns, a well-lit showroom to highlight everyone's natural beauty, and strangers becoming friends. It's a wonderful thing to shop somewhere that listens to you and makes you feel like you're the only one that matters in this most beautiful moment of your life. We'd love to have you and your friends find your dress and become a part of the Something New family.
Well, and I know it was very brave of you, being that you came from a family with newspaper background, owning newspapers and things like that, for you to then write about your story in a book that I'm sure you talked a little bit about the pain, and that had to take a lot of courage while your dad was still living to speak to the fact that it was difficult, disease or whatever it may be, to like be able to say, hey, this is something I went through while that person's still alive. Was that hard?
Well, I don't share like a lot of details. I think that's the thing that's kind of interesting is that, I write a lot. I share as much as I can, but like naturally, and this about me, I'm a super private person. So I labored, like extremely labored over how to communicate kind of my pain and my story, because my parents divorcing, my dad's story, my parents, it's not necessarily my story to tell. Other people would say, well, you're part of how it affected you is. And I agree with that, but I just had to try to honor the timeline of that too. So there's, so much more to that story than what I have been able to share. I just tried to share,
just enough for people to get a picture of where you're coming from.
Yeah. And what do we do with all of this emotional pain and chronic stress and kind of unresolved issues? I mean, it was such a long season.
It was
and you just didn't know, when things would end or how they would end, and the not knowing. I mean, that's a hard place to live in. So that's why I really had to kind of get into this everyday mindset.
Can I ask you what you feel like changed to make you feel like you said you're coming out of it? What do you think changed to help you come out of it?
Yeah. Well, there's definitely something that happens when a parent passes, that shifts everything in your world, no matter what your relationship. It just is a very bizarre feeling to think, I don't have a dad anymore in this realm, I say, because I know that he's with the Lord. But it's just, it just is different. And I had been grieving him for a long time. So I thought maybe that would make it a little easier, which sounds really naive, but it hasn't. It's just different. And I'm at the point where it's just like really settling in now. But I think, with that, for the past probably like 2 years, I was in charge of all of his health care, and, it was almost like a full-time job for me. So there definitely is space.
The lighter load of not having to carry that.
Yeah. And so I just, after he passed, I just kind of to myself said, this is going to be my year of recovery. And so I wasn't, I like to write out goals and lists and all of that. But it hasn't been that way. It's kind of just been a keeping in step with the spirit. And, when endings and beginnings are tied together very closely, I talk about that in my first book, because every ending is really a beginning, right? So when my dad died, that started a new beginning for me, maybe that I didn't ask for or want at that time, but it is what it is. And so I have to look at beginnings and some new things. So for me, I'm just really kind of, like there's so much talk now about like dysregulated nervous systems. Okay. I for certain have one. So I'm just kind of taking care of myself right now. And I'm also trying to learn some new things, because I think that's really important in beginnings and new seasons too. So like I'm taking horseback riding lessons and doing things that really nourish and take care of my soul, because when our souls are healthy, then
there's an overflow.
It affects our bodies, it affects our relationships. So I was doing the best I could in the midst of the chaos, and the chaos has died down a little now. And so, yeah.
Well, I bet your family's going to really appreciate that too.
Yeah.
Just the chaos dying down.
Yeah.
Mom finding a little bit new pep in her step.
Yeah. I just feel like I kind of just need to return to myself a little bit. I was just, surviving and giving out and doing what had to be done and what I chose to do. But now I can kind of just give like that little 10-year-old Trina what she needs right now to grow up even more and be excited about the future again.
Mm-hmm. I love it. Okay, let's get into those 3 O's in your book, Unclutter Your Soul. So you said there's 3 it's a process that you would say of uncluttering.
Yes.
Right? So what are the 3 steps?
Yeah. So the book's broken down into 3 sections. Each chapter is kind of like an action item, which you'll like. I think that's important because when we are so much in our heads, like we need like a little bit of clarity, but also it's a very gentle guide for people that are just in the thick of it. So, but the overarching idea is that we observe, we own, and we overcome. So when we can observe what's happening in our life, because sometimes, like I said, you can't see the forest for the trees, but when you can ask the Holy Spirit. I have like a take inventory guide that you can get on my website. It's in the book. Maybe when good friends point out things, you've done that in my life in the 12 years, you've pointed out things and said some hard things at times, or I see this, that I wasn't able to see myself. So you listen and you begin to pay attention, because paying attention precedes change. When we can see what needs to change, then we can take that step. And then we just have to begin to own all of the junk. And sometimes our stories, and mine was very much like that. Sometimes there's junk like clutter that I didn't bring into my life. It's just there by association. So does that mean I have to take responsibility for it? Well, I have to take responsibility for what I'm going to do with that now, how I'm going to respond. Yeah. Respond and react and just get brutal. Even like just owning my day. Like, am I going to just keep thinking, oh, when I get on the other side, I'm going to experience peace and joy? Or can I take small action items for today? So we just really have to take that ownership and then to overcome. And that was a big like mental shift for me, because overcoming, kind of meant like what I just said, like, well, when I get on the other side or when things go back to the way they were, well, spoiler alert, nothing ever goes back to the way that it was. And we don't want to do that really. God wants us to look future forward, and he's doing a new thing. He always talks about, right? So, but overcoming, if we are believers, that's just who we are. We are overcomers. It's who God made us to be. So it's just something that we are. And then it's really overcoming, like focusing on that ing. Mm-hmm. It's something that we just are going to continue to do. You don't do it once and you're done. You're just living a life of overcoming. And so that was a big shift for me and felt like, okay, I can do that. Like, this is not far off. I can overcome what I need to overcome in today. And then tomorrow we'll deal with the next thing, you know?
Or that phone call or whatever. It could be even that bite size. It can be like an overcome this meeting I'm about to have.
Right.
Or, I mean, I always think about like the families around the holidays. Okay, I can overcome that dinner that we're going to go, everybody's going to be together. Or I can overcome, you know, like you said, just bringing it down to like a little tiny bite size can sometimes just feel so like rewarding. You can walk away and be like, I just did that. I just made it through that. Okay, maybe I can do tomorrow.
Right. And you build a confidence in that. And that's where we get overwhelmed, is that it's just, you know, you're seeing everything all at once and it's too much. So when you can break it down, and sometimes I even do like a to done list instead of a to do, you know, and I'll write down everything I did that day and then think.
Like in your journal?
Yeah, in my journal or like a notepad, but I like to handwrite things down. And it makes a big difference because especially, I mean, I had a lot of, stay at home mom years. And so it kind of feels like I'm just going in circles or in dealing, you know, with caring for a ill parent. You just feel like nothing's happening. But if I sit down and I write down all these things, it's like, no, actually I've really done a lot. And then it gives you a confidence, you know, the next day to do what you need to do that day. Because, you know, the everyday isn't always glamorous, but that's where the living is. Mm-hmm. It's also where we experience the peace and joy, not in the future, but in today.
If there's anything you'd tell someone that reached out to you right now and said, hey, Trina, I'm really feeling overwhelmed because of, you know, some really crazy life circumstances, what would you tell them?
Well, first I would just tell them you're not alone, because it feels so isolating, I think, when you are just overwhelmed with things that are completely out of your control. So I'd want them to just know that they're not alone and to be graceful with themselves as they would be a friend. I'd ask them to start to look at themselves and what they need to do as they would a friend, and to try to speak to themselves in a really encouraging voice.
Okay. That's so good. Well, I'd like to bring out our drink.
Yeah.
And it's your favorite drink.
Yeah.
And all things England, I feel like today.
Yeah.
What's the name of your favorite drink, Trina?
A London Fog.
Which
is a good
name,
name, right?
Yeah, it's a good name. What's in a London Fog?
A London Fog is kind of like a tea latte. So it's Earl Grey tea, which is a really lovely tea if you're a tea drinker, kind of like a black tea with bergamot, I think, is in it. And then milk of your choice that they kind of froth, and it's a tea latte. But
do you make this at home?
I don't make it. I'll just drink like Earl Grey. I make a matcha latte at home now. That's kind of my next favorite. I love coffee. It just doesn't love me so much. So I can do decaf, but I think, you know, all the things we're talking about, my body is just so like tweaked out that I can't do extreme caffeine, and tea is gentle. So.
And where can they find you if they want to listen to Trina more?
Yeah. At my website, you can kind of find a base for everything. It's trinamcneilly.com. I've got a really fun little 2-minute quiz on there that you can take to see how you handle stress and overwhelm in your life. And on Instagram, I'm Trina_McNeilly. And Substack, where I kind of put latest writing, is if you just go to Substack, the Everyday Observer.
I love it. So, okay. And what we're going to do for our listeners is we're going to have you sign in the studio your latest book, Unclutter Your Soul, and we're going to give it to one of our lucky viewers.
Yay.
Okay. So let me try the London Fog. Cheers.
Okay. Cheers.
Oh, it's sweeter than I thought. Mm-hmm. It's got a little bit of a sweet.
Yeah. Oh, I do think we've got Starbucks. They add maybe a little bit of a vanilla type syrup in as well.
Yeah. Well, it was good. It was yummy. So thanks.
I'm
for
getting
sharing.
you ready for London. You
That's
have
right.
to drink some tea for me.
Okay. Well,
Have a proper tea while you're there for me.
I will actually. I think on Saturday I'm going to an official tea.
Ooh, an
And I'm
afternoon
really
tea.
excited. But if you guys enjoy this episode today and want to stay in touch with us as we go through all these amazing guests, please make sure you subscribe to this show, but also tell your friends about it, like and comment. We appreciate it. And I hope you'll join us again on the Something New Show. Bye, guys. Take care. Thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe to the show, rate, review, and share with a friend. Also, follow the Something New Show on Instagram and Facebook. If you want a fuller experience, watch the show on YouTube to help you create a life worth celebrating.